up into a national conversation and at times a national crisis about police violence and how communities respond to police violence and difficult questions about police tactics and police strategy around communities of color, particularly when police forces themselves are not demographically representative of the groups that they're policing. In that national conversation, and that national arc, you could almost put a marker on August 9th, 2014 with the police shooting of Michael Brown, who was 18 years old and unarmed when he was killed by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. Michael Brown's death led to weeks of protest over late last summer. A few months later, in November, a grand jury cleared the officer who shot Michael Brown of all charges in conjunction with that killing. They decided not to indict that officer, and during the protests over that decision, local businesses in Ferguson, Missouri were burned to the ground. Another man, a grown man named Eric Garner on Staten Island, New York, he died after police put him in a chokehold while they were arresting him for selling loose cigarettes in Staten Island. Eric Garner actually died a few weeks before Michael Brown was shot, but the protests in Ferguson seemed to amplify the response to his police-involved death. Thousands of people marched on Staten Island last summer to protest what had happened to Eric Garner. And then when a grand jury decided not to indict the police officers in Eric Garner's death in December, the protests started again with people blocking highways and bridges, and by then it was not just in New York but around the country for Eric Garner. Meanwhile, police in Cleveland responded to a call in a local park about a 12-year-old. 12-year-old boy named Tamir Rice had been playing with a realistic-looking airsoft pellet gun. Within a blink of pulling up to him, within less than 3 seconds, one of the officers responding to that call shot and killed that 12-year-old boy. That was in November. Nobody has been charged in Tamir Rice's killing in Cleveland. In February, it was suburban Madison, Alabama, when police stopped Sureshbhay Patel after somebody reported a stranger walking through the neighborhood, somebody they didn't recognize. Sureshbhay Patel was a grandfather who was in the neighborhood visiting his family. One of the officers slammed him to the ground so brutally it left him paralyzed. That officer was charged with third-degree assault and felony civil rights abuse. That same month, it was police in Pasco, Washington, who shot an unarmed man who'd been throwing rocks at them, seemed to be having some sort of episode. They shot the man, Antonio Zambrano Montes, 17 times as he ran away from them, and the man died. Nobody has been charged in that incident. Last month in Inkster, Michigan, it was a man named Floyd Dent who came forward to say that he'd been pulled over and badly beaten by local police. He was left with a fractured eye socket and broken ribs. It happened to him in January, but the tape of that beating has been playing on a loop in the Detroit area since it surfaced just a few weeks ago. In that Inkster case last week, one of the officers was charged with felony mistreatment of a prisoner. The charge against Mr. Dent was erased. Just today, we got video of officers in the Inkster police station house appearing to spray Floyd Dent's blood off their clothes. The officers exchanging fist bumps, apparently celebrating how well that arrest and that beating went for them. An attorney for Mr. Dent says his client was lying there, still bleeding, still needing urgent medical attention, just out of view of the camera, as the officers celebrated and blew off steam, and at one point even reenacted a little bit of the arrest and the beating for each other. The beginning of this month brought news of the shooting death of unarmed Walter Scott in North Charleston, South Carolina. That confrontation also began with a relatively anodyne traffic stop. It ended with a police officer shooting Mr. Scott multiple times as Mr. Scott ran away from him across a vacant lot. The officer in that case has been charged with murder. And as the nation was absorbing that news, oh look, there's more. Word came from Tulsa, Oklahoma, that somebody holding the title of reserve deputy in the Tulsa Sheriff's Department had shot and killed the suspect in an undercover drug sting. This reserve deputy was a 73-year-old insurance executive. He says he meant to draw his taser, but he mistakenly pulled his gun out and shot Eric Harris fatally. That reserve deputy, his name is Robert Bates. He had been a longtime donor to the Sheriff's Department. Tulsa World reported that supervisors in the Tulsa Sheriff's Office had falsified training records for Mr. Bates, so allegedly he appeared to be qualified for certain duties when he was not. Well, last week, that reserve deputy, Robert Bates, pled guilty to a charge of manslaughter in that case, and then the judge in the case allowed him to go to the Bahamas for a family vacation before anything else happened. Today in Tulsa, a top official in the Sheriff's Department resigned once an internal memo surfaced which showed him asking staffers to modify that reserve deputy's reviews and records about hours of training. That high-ranking official stepped down today in Tulsa. But meanwhile, the Tulsa Sheriff's Department also inexplicably released undercover video showing the man who got killed by that reserve deputy in the days leading up to the day that they killed him. The video shows Eric Harris selling drugs to an undercover officer. He makes an arrangement at one point to sell the undercover officer a gun. The sheriff's department in Tulsa said they released that video because the media had asked for it, which could conceivably be true if anybody had known that it existed. But it's also totally irrelevant to the fact that that man was shot days later by a Tulsa reserve deputy. And it also looks a lot like what happened in Ferguson, Missouri last summer when the Ferguson police chief released video of 18-year-old Michael Brown from a convenience store incident that happened before the encounter in which a police officer fatally shot him. Tape of a totally unrelated incident, which made Michael Brown look terrible, which again happened before he was killed and did not involve the officer who shot him. The police chief, when they released that damning video of Michael Brown, said he had to release it because the media had been clamoring for that tape. He couldn't continue to withhold it, even though in Ferguson there doesn't appear to be any record at all that anybody asked to see that tape. So we've been living this story over and over, right? Month after month, shooting after chokehold after beating. This list that we just did, this little timeline I just did, is by no means complete. You just pick a calendar month in the last year or so, Google around, and up pops a story, and now increasingly a video, of police violence, most often involving an unarmed man who is not white. Day after day, week after week, season after season, city after city after city after city, and now Baltimore. What we are seeing in this latest American city is the latest local manifestation of what is turning out to be a national crisis. It began earlier this month with that arrest of Freddie Gray on April 12th. We have video of that. You may have seen it already. I'm not going to play it over and over again as background material. It is short. It's tape. It is difficult to watch. But this was April 12th.
Shorty, that was after they tased the out of him like that. Man, I've been recording this. I've been recording it. I've been recording it. What car they come out of, yo?
He on a bike, yo, right there. Him right there. He on a bike.
I got it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
The officers who arrested Freddie Gray on April 12th said that he saw them and took off running, and that's why they gave chase and then ended up stopping him. They arrested him, they loaded him into that police van. As you saw in the tape, he seems to be screaming in pain as they put him into the van. Whatever happened next, whatever happened over the next 45 minutes, Freddie Gray emerged from that van with his spinal cord reportedly nearly severed, his voice box crushed. One theory is that the Baltimore police may have given Mr. Gray what they call a rough ride, where they leave a suspect handcuffed, but not buckled in at all, and then they stomp on the accelerator, stomp on the brakes, whip the van around so that the suspect goes flying. More than one person has ended up paralyzed that way in Baltimore even before Freddie Gray. But Freddie Gray ended up paralyzed and in a coma. He was arrested on April 12th. On April 19th, 1 week later, he died.